Well, I think some time, and if there are questions that somebody would like to ask Mr. Sharma, I think this is the time. Please make it a question and not a comment, because then many will get a chance and we'll get to hear the minister.
Sir, none of your hubs, manufacturing zones are coming up in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, parts of Orissa, which are rich in minerals, resources, and human capital as well as money capital. Do you really expect that people from these areas will keep on going towards the western corridor, western part of the country, to really earn their living all through?
That's not our thinking. We have a national approach. It's a national manufacturing policy. As I said, this is being done in partnership with the states. Now, the states which have stepped forward created land banks, which include the state of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh also. In fact, if I had to give you the list, near Delhi, the first one which is coming up, and two are almost equidistant. One is in Haryana. There's the Manesar Babur. That's about close to 373 square kilometer, or close to 400. Then Kushkera, Bhiwadi, Neemrana in Rajasthan is about 175 square kilometer. Then Dadri, Noida, Dadri, and Ghaziabad. That is another 200 square kilometers plus. Then we had Pithampur Dhar, Mao in Madhya Pradesh, that is 370 square kilometer. We have a port city being developed in Maharashtra, the Dighi port, which is 323 square kilometer. Then the Shendra Pitkin is 84 square kilometer. Tumkur is 50 square kilometer. Tumkur is south, it's not west. Then the two in Andhra, they are again in south, they will get connected to these other corridors. Now, I have written, and the secretary to the government has written to all the chief secretaries. I personally, there is one which I forgot to mention, the last one, which is the biggest one incidentally, where the world's biggest water desalination process is presently, the work is on. And the high flux of Singapore and the Japanese consortium is working. There's Dholera in Gujarat, and that's 900 square kilometer plus. So these are the townships. Now we have to wait. I have been speaking to Nitish Kumar, so UP gets covered, UP is already covered. I've personally been to Bhubaneswar to talk to Naveen Patnaik. I've written to him, and we are persuading them to put together their own plans and write to us. As I said while speaking, we want every region of India to develop. But it is for the states. The government of India cannot dictate to the states. If a state says that I have this land bank and I meet the parameters, parameter is minimum is 5,000 hectares. You cannot create a township in few hundred acres because it's a social infrastructure, downstream infrastructure which will come up. Manufacturing may take only 30% of the land area. The rest is institutions and the other infrastructure. I'm sure that other states are seriously working on it. There's the indication which I get. I've recently got some soundings have been made by Chhattisgarh that they have put together the land parcels. So I said that write to us. And once they have met with the parameters, we will approve. So nobody is saying to a state that don't do it. As the philosophy is, a national policy must embrace every state of the Republic of India, but I must qualify every state will not be in a position to put together such big land banks. Bigger states will be able to do. When I was in Punjab, Sardar Prakash Singh Badal told me that we cannot have 5,000 hectares. But what we have said, that even if you don't have, if you create an industrial cluster, zone it, and manage it through an SPV, the state has to declare it. Then the benefits of the mother policy will be made available to such clusters. We have kept that provision.
So I think it was very nice of you to enunciate the semiconductor policy. The first policy maybe did not lead to much, so a lot of announcements were made. Now, I mean, over $4 billion is supposed to be invested this newspaper report say, for semiconductor manufacturing. But 1 week prior to that, I mean, Intel announced that it has already disclosed, I mean, demonstrating, it was demonstrating a 450 nanometer wafer and said it is investing $13 billion just to move to 14 and 10 nanometer technology. So for Intel, which is already doing 22 nanometer, to move to 14 and 10, it was investing 13 billion. So is this 4 billion, I mean, in a semiconductor, because whole of the future is on Internet of Things, everything will be enabled by electronics. So is 4 billion viable or sufficient?
You see, there are two projects actually which have been cleared, totaling close to 40,000 crores, 20,000 crores. We have been talking to the global to get them interested to manufacture the chip here. I personally have gone to Texas Institute, Texas Technology, to persuade them. Intel is in talks with us. They are the global vendors. This is a subject which I am not dealing directly. Sam Petroda and the team, they are talking to the companies which have the technology. We have written that we have to do it. I'm sure that will happen. Because even if you put together 40,000 crores, it's a big, big fund. The rest you can do.
Where are you? Who was started? Raise your hand. Okay. While he's getting ready.
Sir, what's there for the telecom?
You introduce yourself.
Sir, my name is Rajiv. And what's there for the telecom industry, sir? In the manufacturing policy, it's a market of 50 billion industries, and our own India's percentage is only 15%. Why we are not promoting our own country in this? Sir, telecom industry, most of the capital goods are exported from foreign, and our market share is only of 15%. Why we are not promoting our own industries from India?
You asked a good question. It's not only telecom but also the power generation. Particularly the supercriticals and the ultracriticals. We cannot. We cannot be held hostage to imports. When you have 900 million Indians using mobile telephones, maybe few million would have come down, and the spectrum has been rendered non-saleable or difficult to sell, thanks to the controversies. We really relish in such things and end up hurting ourselves. But yes, there is a security dimension. We need to have our own equipment, investment in that. When we look at the next 5 years of infrastructure building, about 190 billion will go in only in the telecom sector. When we have the foreign companies who are coming here, including Samsung and Nokia, should look at what manufacturing they are doing. Not saying that they are covering all sectors, but some of the telephone exchanges and also the components which are getting manufactured now in India. Similarly, in case of power, it's frightening because you have asked me the right thing. We will have close to $300 billion of investment, both public and private sector, in the power sector in the next 5 years. Now, if we keep on importing and don't create domestic capacities, we'll remain handicapped for decades. So we have created some capacities. Both state governments and the private sector have to place orders. One is between the L&T and the Mitsubishi, the state of the art. Extra capacity today, BHEL and Siemens partnership. So we have better power equipment being produced, or turbines, for these supercriticals or ultracriticals in India than the suboptimal equipment or technologies which have private power producers are importing from China. So we are seized of that, and that is going to happen.
So my name is Shuchi. You talked a lot about the new measures and new capacity building that's going to happen. Are there any measures being taken for the existing SMEs and family-owned businesses in India so that they can scale up and be at par with what is the global standard today?
Yes, we have a dedicated ministry and a dedicated fund which has been augmented in this year's budget speech by the Finance Minister to CP. We have a Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. We also are looking at how to change the ecosystem for them. If you look at two of our recent major policy pronouncements, one is the single brand retail, where 63 of the global majors and the total investment proposals would be how many billion? 42 billion. With IKEA being the biggest, there's a stipulation of sourcing 30% from MSMEs. Similarly for multi-brand retail. When you look at the sourcing that is being done, Walmart is doing sourcing maybe of $1.5 billion. IKEA would be moving closer to 1 billion. Tesco's are sourcing 500 million sterling. Carrefour 400 million euros. This year, the announcement of Marks and Spencer is that 70% of their sourcing from their global stores, retail operations, will be from India. 70%. So SMEs have a very special place in the new dispensation. So whether availability of affordable credit or getting access through these new policy initiatives. At the same time, we have to scale up the MSMEs, particularly when it comes to technology. And to my mind, we have to change also the definition, not keep the MSMEs that small. Because if you are an MSME today or a family-run enterprise, and you're producing, say, home appliances or the steel kitchen appliances, which 100% are being sourced by IKEA from India. And if you are lucky that you're supplying to them, supplying to one or two other global majors, in 1 year, your turnover will be such that you will then disqualify. So you will expand and contract. That's why we have been working on it, that we should change it. Though it's not my domain, I don't want a cabinet colleague to take objection to that, but we will do it.
My name is Sumendra Kumar Baral. My question is, everybody is concerned and talking about inclusive development and inclusive growth. How can inclusive growth and development is possible without inclusive governance, which is much more responsible, much more transparent and accountable? As you mentioned, sir, there are so many governance deficits are there, especially the corruption from the top to bottom, especially the political corruption. How to remove the main bottlenecks? That is the main question. Thank you, sir.
One is a perception, second is a reality. The tragedy of India is that we enjoy inflicting wounds on our own body. There are so many positives which I was listing. So much of good work that is being done. But the shrill discourse drowns that out. I said yesterday in Mumbai that everybody has a responsibility. It's not only the political leadership. The political leadership is comprised of those who are part of you. They also have sons and daughters, brothers, sisters, brothers. They are elected by the people. In a democracy, there is accountability. If I had not performed, I should be thrown out. Governments get thrown out, voted out. Does it not happen? We are a democracy, rule-based and rule-governed. It was in this state that, the neighboring one, when the Satyam fraud took place. How many corporate frauds in the world? Was the word corruption in English language, which is part of Oxford and Chambers dictionary for centuries. It was not coined in India. This means that there was corruption taking place, and even today, beginning with Enron, and the list is a Northern Rock and Lehman Brothers. It's a long list if I had to go through it. This country fixed that corporate fraud, Satyam, in a transparent manner. Those responsible for it are in prison. And the company as such changed hands. It's Mahindra Satyam. 28,000 jobs were saved. Now, what we have to do, that we have to look at the systems that are in place. When we say the responsibility of everyone, that the discourse is such which does not create demoralization, which does not paint a picture of India as a nation of the corrupt, which we are not. If you look at the number of people who have been accused since independence in high positions, what percentage? What percentage of your legislators? I'm not saying everybody is lily white. They are men and women of character and conviction, of integrity and intellect. And they cannot be a greater disservice to India if the national narrative demoralizes the younger people and makes them lose faith in systems and institutions. You are and will remain a functional constitutional democracy. First empowerment was the right to vote. When the big changes were taking place in the world which I referred to and in India, that was the time, a few years before many of the youngsters were born. So you're right in questioning. But when India embraced adult franchise, our wisdom was questioned. There were people within the Constituent Assembly who were fighting with Nehru and Patel and others that why are you doing it? That Indians are not literate. Read what Churchill had to say about us. But the founders of the Indian Republic and those who were leaders of the national movement said no. It has to be participatory, it has to be inclusive. So that happened. In one stroke, whether you were a Birla or a Tata, or a poor peasant, or a landless laborer, everybody had one vote. Nobody had more than one vote. So that people make their governments. And it's actually the less empowered and disadvantaged who vote more in the elections. Those who are empowered, upwardly mobile, for them it is a party day and a vacation. Many of them don't vote. Their staff votes, their drivers vote, their gardeners vote. This is the reality of India. Second was the right to information. Today it is a right. A constitutional right has been given. Earlier only that members of legislature, members of parliament could ask the government or hold the government to account. Today a citizen can file it and ask any information, any file noting. And if an officer does not make it available, that is punishable offense. So you should know that. You have a right to education. That is truly empowerment of the people. We are working on the Food Security Act. You have an inclusive growth. You have Manrega. Yes, more should be done. Because I am of this view that it should become larger in its embrace. Bring in weaving, skilling. Because a lot of money is being spent there. But at least 100 days of employment and wages are ensured. This is inclusive growth. That We have resources, the resources get redistributed. But we also have to create a mass awareness in our country. Why should the state, which has a duty to subsidize the poor, subsidize diesel for a hospital, a school, for a two-wheeler, for a three-wheeler, for public transport, also have to subsidize for big SUVs which are owned by the rich? So therefore, fine balance will have to be there, and this country is working on it, so that the entitlement of the citizens reach to them directly. What you talk of Aadhaar, what you talk of UID, this revolution is taking place. In 5-10 years' time, India would be different, and citizens of this country will be much more powerful.
Minister, you mentioned that attracting foreign investment to the country is imperative. In that context, I wanted to know, what is the government doing to encourage the Jet Etihad deal, especially given the fact that Etisalat and Emaar have gone out? How are you going to be guaranteeing the security of the investment?
I think that is what our foreign partners want to know. I was in Abu Dhabi last month, and I was conscious that as they are looking at India for strategic investments, and they have huge funds, they have some bad experiences, whether it is Etisalat, whether it is Emaar, whether it is DB Reality. Now what has happened? It's not because of the governments. You choose a partner, the partner is faulted or accused of having violated the law. Now an accusation is an accusation unless and until it is established. What is happening in India is that we are moving in the reverse direction, as any jurist would tell you. We are prejudging. We are having media trials. And the judiciary also somewhere gets influenced. Judiciary is not insulated in mind when there is a competition to play to the gallery. Competitive sensationalization for TRP rating has become a favorite pastime. Elsewhere in the world, as institutions and technologies have evolved, regulatory mechanisms have been put in place. In India, you dare to talk of what America, France or Germany or UK has done? Nobody wants to hear. And that's the real problem, that reassurance India will have to give, that sovereign commitments are there. Now, if you are a foreign investor, whether you are a Telenor, whether you are a Sistema of Russia, whether you are Etisalat, you have come in response to an extant policy of a sovereign state, a policy which is approved by the Cabinet or the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. You come with a foreign direct investment. You apply for FIPB approval. Your application is scrutinized. You are given approval. And it is stamped finally by the Cabinet. Can that be compromised? This is a fundamental question. And I feel there will be a time when this issue of the separation of powers and responsibilities will have to be honored. You have a legislature which has a responsibility. You have an executive, that is the elected government of the day, which is answerable or accountable to the people of India through the parliament. And you have a judiciary which is meant to interpret the law. It would be the worst thing to happen if the judiciary overtakes the function of the executive and the legislature.
Question here, question there, and this. And these are the last three questions. And then
Yeah, good evening, sir. My name is Premjit Singh. I am from the textiles and apparel sector. I just heard that you spoke about the R&D investment in innovation has been hiked from 1% to 2%. My question is that how do a person, an individual like me, access to that 2%? Or is there any channelization that happens that one can go and access Today, if I have to do some prototyping about my innovation, it becomes very tough to invest in that.
You see, it's all institutional, both the public sector and the private sector have to come together. You cannot have in a country of 1.2 billion, 2% of GDP for innovation being individually distributed. So you have to create institutional mechanisms, connect to an institution which is engaged in R&D in the textile sector. Under my Ministry of Textiles, there are a lot of R&D going on in textiles, and for which information is available. More funds have been given. We just have to look at them. And if you want to seek more clarity, my officers are here. You can write to our ministry. I'm sure that much of this information is available on the website also.
My name is Pawan Soni and I am a PhD student at IIM Bangalore. So my question is that if you have to increase the share of manufacturing in our GDP, and especially chip fabrication, etc., when we have to, don't you think that we have to also strengthen our intellectual property rights? Because many companies, especially in the pharma industry, fear India because of our poor IP, and World Economic Forum doesn't rate India very high in terms of its property rights protection.
I'm afraid that's not correct. Again, it is what the perception is sought to be created. You should know how the WTO agreement was negotiated. India, along with some other developing countries, had taken a principled position. And when the TRIPS agreement was negotiated and signed, dealing with the intellectual property, there was a time given to countries between 1995 and 2005. That was the time period for India. And there were two amendments, major amendments to our intellectual property. And the last final one was in 2005. So our intellectual property laws are firmly and fully aligned with the best intellectual property laws and practices in the developed countries, and are fully in sync with the TRIPS agreement. You may perhaps be referring in context of pharma to this issue of compulsory licensing. Compulsory licensing is part of the TRIPS agreement. It's a flexibility which is available, originally meant for developing countries, but then invoked by developed countries. In 2001 itself, 178 compulsory licenses were given by the United States of America. In case of pharmaceuticals, 78 times it has been invoked by different countries, not by India. 63 times compulsory licensing has been done by United States of America, UK, Canada. Very few instances are there where countries like Thailand, Brazil, or an African country has invoked it. So therefore it is not at all in conflict. If you read the Intellectual Property Act, the Patents Act, it's section 84 and section 92. 84 is an adjudication process. An Indian company wanting to manufacture something, seeking a compulsory license, first has to apply to the holder of the patent. And if not, has to give enough documentation and proof about the pricing, access, and the beneficial effect or otherwise. Then it goes through a fairly prolonged adjudication process. When NATCO was given a compulsory license to manufacture an anti-cancer drug, which bears patents, what was that, Sorenifib? Now, it is used for cancer treatment. The cost of treatment of the drug per patient per month was 2,88,000 rupees. It came down to 8,800 rupees. But still, under law, because we are a fair country, the patent holder gets a royalty of 6% So we have not robbed anyone. And this was not the government of India invoking in public health interest, which the governments have done elsewhere. This question was raised with me by the US Trade Representative, Ambassador Ron Kirk, after our Controller General of Patents adjudicated, and it went through an appellate process, but it was a correct decision which was made. Within 2 weeks of that, the Federal Drug Authority in the United States of America placed an order of an anti-cancer drug used for breast cancer on an Indian company, Shantabad. The first was Netco. So this was an order placed so that the Indian company, yes, Indian company makes, I'll give you the details. It is all in public domain. Maybe I'm getting the company, it may be different. Just check the link quickly. It is an Indian pharmaceutical company on which specifically by name the order was placed. Now on the 13th of March, they have made it permanent. That was for a limited quantity for 1 year. Now the United States has placed further order to ensure the availability of anti-cancer medicines on Indian generics. That is the reality. Now generics will be prescribed. That decision has been made. Indian generics have changed the global discourse. Generics are not counterfeits. We are the global leader of generics. If America thinks that Indian generics are good enough to treat the American patients, why should we be shy of that?
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir. We want to know a little bit more about the corridors in Andhra Pradesh. I am Dr. Vishnumurthy, IIT Engineering College, Andhra Pradesh. We want to know a little bit more about 2 corridors as you announced in Andhra Pradesh. And second one, as you rightly said, land was the big issue in all the issues in manufacturing units or whatever it may be, especially in power sector. Why don't we have a uniform land acquisition policy and identify the land suitable for the power sector by land resurvey, like other manufacturing policy? Thank you, sir.
Dalin, the 2 in Andhra are, one is near Nellore, and the second, Chittoor, and the second one? Prakasham. Yes. So there are 2. But now when it comes to land, I am frankly speaking not going to confuse myself with multiple issues. I am very clear about manufacturing. That manufacturing will also embrace the power sector. And that is where I explained that this policy is to develop these townships in partnership between the government of India and the state governments, where the land will be the equity of the state governments. Land will not be alienated. Indian investor and foreign investor will apply to set up a manufacturing base and will get the usage of land as per the best global practices on lease cum rental basis. So if I dive into this other area, then my manufacturing townships will not take off.
Not often we get a chance to hear from the highest levels of government on issues of policy. As I was saying, it's not often we get a chance to hear and see for ourselves how the about the highest levels of government. And today we are grateful to Mr. Anand Sharma, the Honorable Minister for Commerce and Industry, for giving us that opportunity. And we would like to thank him for taking the trouble for coming down. And we look forward to his the next visit very soon. At this time, I would like to request our Director, Mr. Chandra, to give him a memento as a token of our appreciation.
Try you into I am Bangalore colors from here. This is a t-shirt for you from I am Bangalore. By our faculty on issues of commerce in South Asia and innovation.
Finally, thank the audience for making this event success and thank you and good night.